Amazing love, how can it be that thou, my God, might die for me? Amen? Amen. Well, my name is Richard Tuning, and I've practiced this for several days now to introduce who I am. I am the presiding elder of the North Georgia District of the, I messed it up already, of the South Georgia Provisional Annual Conference of the Global Methodist Church. I don't have a business card. I have a banner. Okay, but it is my pleasure, absolute pleasure, to be with you today to talk about something that is incredibly exciting. I shared with the Trinity on the Hill Church this morning that Keith may throw something at me when I say this, but I truly believe that we are not building a denomination. We are participating in a mighty movement of God. And so, you and I have the opportunity to be a part of that movement, to be able to be in the very beginnings of a chance to see what God is not only already done, but more excitingly, what God is going to do through these people called Methodists. There are two things that I want you to hear from me today, and you're going to hear an awful lot of stuff, good stuff from Keith. But two things. One is I truly believe that this movement understands that everything that we do primarily depends on the power and the freedom of the local church to be the church. And the second thing is I truly believe with all my heart that if a church is going to be successful, then it is going to be successful because the lay people of that church have been empowered to use the gifts and the graces that God has given them. Every significant Methodist movement that we have ever experienced was primarily lay-led. And I believe that that's what God is doing for us right now in all the amazing ways that God's at work. I have the pleasure today to introduce you to Reverend Keith Boyette. I asked him just before, we have called him everything in the book the last few days as far as his title is concerned, so I actually wrote it down. He is the Transitional Connectional Officer of the Global Methodist Church, and he leads the Transitional Leadership Council for the Global Methodist Church. I really think that his title should be Energizer Bunny, because you have been in Georgia since September the 27th, is that correct? And I have had the opportunity to be with him for the last several days. I don't know of anybody that gets any more emails, that gets any more texts, that gets any more phone calls than Keith Boyette. It's a tribute to who he is, that God has set him apart for this time to lead this movement. And it's also a tribute to him and who he is, that he is willing to come and have these conversations with us to help us be more informed, to help us to hear what we can expect as we move forward in this transition. North Georgia is an interesting place. You will probably hear me refer to this more than once today, that we have lived under a cloud for a long time. And we are continuing to live under a cloud until November 18th. But in the midst of the cloud, God is with us. So I hope that you will give a very warm welcome to Reverend Keith Boyette and let him know that North Georgia appreciates his efforts.
Well, thank you, Richard. I want to thank the people of Trinity on the Hill for their hospitality. It's been such a great joy to be here today and to experience their leadership. They're one of the vanguard churches that have stood out for what Jesus is doing in these days, and I so appreciate their leadership. Also, so appreciate the ministry of those who have led us in music. So thank you for your prelude. That was amazing. And Can It Be is one of my favorite hymns. Haven't they done a great job leading us? Let's express our appreciation. Well, this is my third time to make what I call a whistle-stop tour of Georgia. I was here several years ago, went to 4 or 5 different places. Then about a year and a half ago, I was in Georgia, went to 4 or 5 places, and now here I'm again. I've been in Georgia so much that I'm thinking if there's a real estate agent in the crowd here, I might look for a second residence. I'm kidding. I'm very happily living in Virginia, but you have a great state, a beautiful state. I think I have been from the far southeastern corner to the far northwestern corner. Yesterday we were in LaGrange. And we drove from LaGrange to Augusta, and I'm told that's kind of driving all the way across the state. I want to thank Richard, who has been my host. Not only has he driven me everywhere, but he had me stay in his home. Now, his wife jumped ship. She probably was the wiser of the two, but Richard has been such a great host, and thank you, Richard. So the Global Methodist Church began its operations on May 1 of 2022. So we're 18 months into this journey. If anyone had told me where we would be at this place, where we are right now, I would not have believed them. God has just been doing amazing things. As of today, we have 3,800 churches that are global Methodist congregations. 3,400 of them are here in the United States, 400 of them are outside the United States. Now, as hard a time as you have had here in Georgia in getting out of the United Methodist Church, our brothers and sisters outside the United States haven't even had a way to get out. So the fact that we have 400 churches is really a testament to a God who makes a way where there is no way. And we will see many of those churches outside the U.S. making their way to us in the coming months and even years. We have to wait to see what the United Methodist General Conference will do. But right now we have 14 provisional annual conferences here in the United States. Every area in the United States is either already organized or they have a transitional conference advisory team that is organizing their area. By the end of the year, early part of next year, we will be organized in every part of the United States. We have provisional annual conferences in Bulgaria, in Slovakia, in Spain. On the continent of Africa, we have operating provisional annual conferences in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and in Kenya. And we have an operating provisional annual conference in the Philippines. In the coming weeks, we will be announcing the beginning of operations of a provisional annual conference in South Africa. We are registering the Global Methodist Church in virtually every country on the continent of Africa, on the continent of Europe, in Central and South America, and throughout Asia. On Thursday, I received an email from a gentleman in India telling me that he had founded the Global Methodist Church of India. And that was the first contact I'd had with him. We had a little exchange, and he now understands there's a process that we need to go through. But this is the wonderful thing. I say that this season is both messy and incredibly exciting. We are running to keep up with the Holy Spirit. I've never experienced that in the life of the church before. And so truly, as Richard said, we're a movement. There are some annual conferences that are in the process, outside the United States, in the process of going through a very long and difficult disaffiliation process that required votes in their annual conference, then by their central conference, and they're waiting for the general conference to vote to approve them. That would be in Estonia, in the Czech Republic, and in the 4 annual conferences in Russia and Eurasia. All of them have had discussions about potentially becoming part of the Global Methodist Church. In Kenya, one of our most recent provisional annual conferences, 2/3 of the churches held meetings, unanimously signed petitions, showed up at their annual conference meeting, presented the petitions and said, "We are now Global Methodist churches," and walked out of the conference, depriving the conference of its quorum, and it could no longer transact any business. That's what I mean. People find a way. God makes a way, even when there's no way. And many of you have had to pay a significant price to reach this point in the process. And I can tell you that there are literally thousands of people all around the world that are praying for the churches of North Georgia. I understand it's some 300 churches that will be voted on November the 18th. And so know that day you are not standing by yourself, but you are backed up by your brothers and sisters. So what I'm going to do today, many of you know that I'm an attorney before I was a pastor. I like to say I'm a recovering attorney. But what I'm going to do is present a case for you. I'm going to present an argument, basically, for why you should be part of the Global Methodist Church. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Global Methodist Church. Many of you all have heard some of this before. I'm going to give you about 7 reasons why, if I were making a decision today, I would be part of the Global Methodist Church. And then I'm going to give you some questions that I would suggest you would want to ask if you are going to be an independent church. And then we're going to have a question and answer period. And I want you to know that no question is off limits. Even if you think nobody else in the room has the question, I guarantee you they will have the question. So I want you to be bold in asking questions. But even after that Q&A period is over, I'm going to be here for as long as any of you want to talk to me to answer your questions. If you asked a question about North Georgia, I'm going to ask Richard to come and answer that because he's the one that is leading the efforts here. So that's the way we're going to go. So I always like to start with the mission of the Global Methodist Church. I think we have to keep this before us at all times. It's not just a slogan. It is at the very core of who we are as Global Methodist. The mission of the Global Methodist Church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ who worship passionately, love extravagantly, and witness boldly. Now, I've been living with this for a couple years now, and God continues to reveal things to me about this mission statement. I want to suggest to you that each part of it builds on the next part. So in other words, the first thing we must do is worship passionately, and that ought to consume all of our life every day of the week. The closer we become to God and more intimate in our worship of Him, the more we will realize who He is and what He has done in our lives, and we'll discover the full extent of His love for each of us. And that leads us to love extravagantly. When you've been loved as we have by God, you can't contain that love anymore. It has to overflow. Worshiping passionately leads to loving extravagantly. And of course, as we begin to love others extravagantly, we discover that they need to hear the good news, that that's one of the best ways we can love others, and that leads to us witnessing boldly. Our vision is to join God in a journey of bringing a new life and reconciliation and the presence of Christ to all people, and to helping each person reflect the character of Christ. That's the next slide. I'm probably going to have to give you that prompt from time to time. And really caught up in this vision statement are some Wesleyan distinctives. We believe in a way of salvation that is marked by God's grace at every stage. And we believe that God not only wants to save us, but he wants to sanctify us. He wants us to increasingly reflect the character of Christ. And so now I want to just highlight some key ministry commitments. The first one is that we want to empower decision-making at the most local level. As Richard said, the basic unit of the Global Methodist Church is the local church. You're the ones that are closest to the needs of your mission field. You're the ones that God has placed a call upon to meet those needs. So we want to be a church which enables people to fulfill the calling that God has upon their lives individually and corporately. So for example, if your church perhaps decides to partner with some other churches in the community to start a new church in a place that doesn't have the kind of Christian witness that would be desired, we think you ought to be able to make that decision without having to go through multiple levels of approval, only to find that at the end of all those levels of approval, well, you're exhausted and no longer have the energy to plant that church. You ought to be able to pivot and respond to those needs that God has placed upon you. I could give hundreds of other examples, but we want you to be empowered to do ministry. We believe the local church is the evangelistic and missional center of the Global Methodist Church. We will not have large institutional general church agencies and boards with employees that have to be paid, and your money goes there and then it somehow reaches the mission field and you don't know how it's used. No, we want you to be able to deploy your resources in ways that you can be meaningfully involved, not just in sharing finances, but your very time, and most importantly, your relationships with those that you are in mission and ministry with. We want to be nimble as a movement. We want to respond quickly to doors that God is opening before us. Someone was sharing recently that God had opened a door in a certain part of the world, and they realized if they didn't mobilize and move through that door right now, that it might close at some future point, and they would have missed the opportunity. That's happened countless times in human history. Doors have opened and doors have closed. It happens in people's lives. There's an opportunity. We have to be nimble in order to be able to do what we need to do. We want to strive for the unity of the church, our unity in Christ, oneness in Christ, not unity to an institution, but unity to the person and work of Jesus Christ. That ought to be what draws us together, keeps us together, helps us grow together. Our goal is to be a global, multicultural, and multi-ethnic church. We need to do that in every part of the church, all around the world. Here in the United States, our society is becoming increasingly diverse, and we will miss the opportunity God is calling us to if we don't reach out to those who happen to be of different cultural or ethnic backgrounds than we are. And that means risk and sacrifice, inconveniencing ourselves so that others can come to know the gospel. The same challenge exists in other parts of the world. It's just different because maybe there are different tribes or ethnic groups in a nation, and we as the church need to reach out to all of them. We have just announced, it was on the screen here as you came in, that our convening general conference will be held in Costa Rica in September of 2024. That was not a decision that was lightly made. It will be a little bit different than putting on a general conference here in the United States, but we thought that was an important thing to communicate that helps people all around the world know that we are not a U.S.-centric church, but we are a church that is truly global. We encourage long-term, enduring global missional partnerships. My vision, our vision, is that every church anywhere in the Global Methodist family would have a meaningful, long-term, enduring relationship with another church somewhere else in another country. And the benefits don't just flow one way. For example, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a pastor will go from the Global Methodist Church into a community, will preach an evangelistic mission. 50 people in that village will come to the Lord, and that afternoon they will organize a new church, and it will start meeting from that Sunday forward. Can you imagine if that happened in our communities here in the United States? I would suggest that we could learn something from our sisters and brothers in the Congo. At the same time, we have gifts that we can offer them as well. By building these long-term, enduring partnerships, we'll build connection and relationship. We want that to occur not only across national boundaries, but also even within our own communities. I think it's great that there's so many churches here. Richard has said to me that he hopes to build that connection so that people know each other in other churches and they can support and encourage one another, pray for one another, be in ministry together. So here's my case for why you should be part of the Global Methodist Church. Individually and corporately, you and I were made for community. God doesn't call us to be Lone Ranger, isolated Christians. We're called to be in community. It's there that we are mentored and coached and grow. It's there that we are resourced in our journey. It's there that we're held accountable to one another. Wesleyans have always been connectional. In fact, saying that you're Wesleyan and independent is really an oxymoron in most of Methodist history. Now, I'm going to say some things about why I think you should be Global Methodist and what questions you should ask if you're thinking of being independent. I want you to know I fervently want each church to prayerfully discern what God is asking you to do. And if God calls you to be an independent church, then I'm 100% behind you if you make that decision. I pray for God's very best and his blessing upon you. So as I say things about why you should be GMC and what you should ask as being independent, please understand, I'm not dissing or speaking against independent churches. It's just things that I would want to consider. We are grounded in shared theological confessions that, by the way, we didn't come up with in this moment. No, these confessions have been affirmed by Christians down through the centuries. Great councils have met and debated the issues that have led to the adoption of these orthodox confessions of the faith. Our Methodist confessions are confessions that have stood the test of time. They are the foundation of who we are in the Global Methodist Church. And we are connected and committed to the work of the Great Commission. Second, we have a settled, connectional, and shared understanding of what it means to be Wesleyan Christians. We are focused on the teaching of doctrine. I believe that one of the tragedies of recent history is that we as Methodists have lost our way. Many Methodists have lost their way doctrinally. But I believe our doctrine is accessible to every person who attends our churches, that we all ought to be theologians to some extent, and so that it ought to be one of the primary purposes of the church to teach doctrine, to help people plumb the riches of our shared heritage and understanding of the faith, and to ensure that every person who calls themselves a global Methodist can articulate those doctrines to others. We want to be constantly nurturing. You know, people say if you stop learning, you stop growing, and I firmly believe that. So no matter how many years you've had in the faith, we ought to be encouraging one another to continue to grow this constant nurturing. And as a global Methodist, you will be in communication with thousands of other churches all around the world who are pulling in the same direction. I've been encouraged by the resources that, for example, Trinity on the Hill is developing to help people understand the catechism of the Global Methodist Church. They're doing that work, but hundreds, if not thousands of others will benefit from the labor that they're doing. We share those resources together. Third, we have a proven, vetted way of deploying pastors in times of transition with meaningful collaboration. Now, I want to tell you, we hope that most churches who come, and we expect that most churches that come will probably come with their existing pastors, although we know that there will be some changes. But every church will at some point face the issue of pastoral transition. In the Global Methodist Church, we have an established way that can occur. And we have been very focused on the fact that churches, local churches, need to have meaningful involvement in the discernment of who their pastor is going to be in the process of that transition. We've made the commitment that we are not going to require a church and a pastor to have a transition unless one of them want it. So if the church wants to stay with their pastor and the clergy wants to stay with that church, then we're not going to mess with that. We believe in long-term pastorates. But in the event that a transition is desired or sought, then what's going to happen is there'll be an extended dialogue between your church, perhaps through your staff parish committee or other leadership body, with the leadership of the Global Methodist Church, in which we will mutually discern who should be the next pastor of that church. I've watched this play out in many situations already. There has not been a moment to date where the church has discerned that this is the person who they would want to be their pastor, that the presiding elder, the president pro tem, the bishop for that region has not likewise come to that decision point. And I expect that through our mutual collaboration, that kind of experience will continue. In addition, we maintain a pool of vetted clergy candidates, people who have been examined, who have met theological education standards, who have passed character reviews, that we stand behind. That's something that the Global Methodist Church is able to provide. Next, connectionalism provides churches with a resource system of vetting, supervising, and holding those deployed in trusted ministerial offices accountable. A significant part of the reason why we have experienced the disruption and chaos of Methodism in recent years here in the United States and worldwide is that there has been a complete breakdown and failure of accountability. We are focused on enhancing, improving, and ensuring that accountability works at every level, from the local church to those who are called and deployed as clergy persons, to key lay leadership, to the leaders of the church globally. I can elaborate on that if you want during the Q&A. Next, the impact each church can have in large-scale, meaningful, mutual long-term partnerships is a key part of the Global Methodist Church. Let me give you an example. In the Bulgarian Provisional Annual Conference, when they made the decision that they were leaving the United Methodist Church and becoming the Global Methodist Church, in that moment, they were cut off from $120,000 that had helped to pay for pastors in the country of Bulgaria. They didn't know how they were going to meet that need. They began to pray, and they had some resources, assets that they could sell off, but that only got them so far. So earlier this year, they came to us and said, we've discerned that if we're going to continue to serve the people of Bulgaria, all of our pastors are going to have to become bivocational. But we are committed to working toward self-sufficiency. The Mid-Texas Provisional Annual Conference heard about that and said, we will walk side by side with you for 5 years to help you achieve that goal. And so this year, the Mid-Texas Provisional Annual Conference is going to help Bulgaria by providing $72,000 to help them pay pastors' salaries. Next year, it will reduce by 20%, and 20% after that. And in 5 years, the Bulgaria church will be completely self-sufficient. Can you imagine trying to do that if you weren't part of a movement that was tied together and working beyond its own local places? So that kind of long-term relationship that will produce fruit. And then the Global Methodist Church adds value to your ministry on the ground. It exists to make the local church and its leaders better, their time more focused on mission and ministry and not consumed with extraneous things that don't advance the mission and ministry, and thus allowing our leaders and members to be more fruitful and more effective. So those are some points that I would make as to why, if I were you, I would make the church the choice to be part of a church that's in the Global Methodist Church. Now, you would expect that's the case I would make. I'm the connectional officer for the Global Methodist Church. So I'm not telling you those are independent reasons, but they are what I find persuasive, and I hope that you will too. Now I'm going to turn to some questions that I would ask if I were in a church that was discerning whether it might be independent. I'm not going to dwell upon these questions. I'm just going to put them up here. I will tell you that this PowerPoint has been made available to the leadership of the North Georgia GMC, and they can provide it to you. You can email me, and I will provide it to you if you want to share it with others. And I see some of you taking pictures. You can do that, and I believe it will be viewable on the video that's being done. But here are some questions. First, in the area of doctrine. What are your congregation's doctrinal commitments going to be? Now, in the Global Methodist Church, we have established doctrinal commitments that are set forth in part 1 of our transitional book of doctrines and discipline. Maybe your church will decide to begin with those, but you have to make that decision if you're an independent church. Of course, if you become a Global Methodist Church, you're agreeing to the doctrinal commitments of the Global Methodist Church. As you begin to dig into those questions of what is your doctrinal commitments going to be, you're going to be confronted with historically controversial topics that have been settled in the Methodist movement for generations. But you will find that there are people in your church who might want to revisit these things. How will you deal with that? I'm going to quickly go through the list. The gifts of the Holy Spirit, the ordination of women. We are completely committed to the ordination of women. Infant baptism or believer's baptism. The way of salvation. What is the way of salvation? The doctrine of predestination. Whether or not there should be episcopacy or oversight of those who are in leadership of a local church. The nature of Holy Communion and who serves communion. The frequency of communion. The authority of Scripture. The relationship to secular government. race relations, issues of migration, which, by the way, is not just a U.S. issue, it's an issue facing countries all around the world. What are our doctrinal positions on these and so many other historically controversial matters? If you're an independent church, how do you determine those? The last one would be human sexuality, including same-gender marriage, inclusion of transgendered persons, inclusion of LGBTQ plus persons. Those are all issues that are settled in the Global Methodist Church. And then, how can your doctrinal commitments be changed? What happens if you journey down the road a couple years and there begins to be conversation about whether you're going to change some doctrinal commitment that has been part of your church? How does that occur? Who has the ability to amend your doctrinal commitments? In the Global Methodist Church, it is very hard to change doctrinal commitments. It takes a 3/4 vote of delegates to the General Conference. I just got to tell you, anytime I'm with Methodists, if I can get 3 out of 4 of them to agree on anything, that's pretty amazing. So our doctrinal commitments are not going to change, I don't believe, because we have them firmly settled. In the area of discipline, who's authorized to administer the sacraments? Who decides that a particular person should be authorized? Now, that's often a question of ordination. So, is your pastor going to be ordained? If so, what are the standards by which the pastor is going to be determined to be ordained? Who's going to be the body or person that ordains your pastor? What must they do in order to be credentialed? And who decides on the credentialing of clergy and what standards will be applied? Part 4 of the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Discipline lays out a process by which we work with people to move from their very first sensing of a call of God right through their preparation for ministry, their education, and their ultimate deployment as a clergy person. If theological education for clergy is required, what educational programs are approved, and who decides about those programs? We have now recommended 8 theological institutions here in the United States for the preparation of persons desiring to be Global Methodist pastors. That has involved our meeting with the administration of those educational institutions, our reviewing their programs, ensuring that they are completely supportive of the doctrines of the Global Methodist Church, reviewing who the faculty members are of those institutions, looking at the course syllabi and the books that are being offered for people to read. In other words, an extensive vetting to say that we stand behind these theological institutions. How will your church make those kinds of determinations? And what body takes action when a clergy person is accused of moral failure or there is problematic behavior in your clergy leadership? Who's going to be the persons or body that gets involved in the midst of conflict resolution in your congregation? And then in the area of transitions, when there is a change in senior pastor, what process is used to decide on who the new pastor will be? And from what pool of potential candidates will the selection process draw? The same issues arise with the associate pastors and the pool that associate pastors would be drawn from. In the area of matters of spirit or the mission of the church, what is your congregation's mission? That's the next slide, I think. There you go. We know what the mission and vision of the Global Methodist Church is. What will be your congregation's mission? And who is responsible for ensuring fidelity to the mission of the church? In other words, avoiding mission slippage or creep. What other churches will you recognize as being in shared mission with you? And how do you and your clergy and lay leaders find inspiration and continuing education? And then finally, how do you determine who you're going to share ministry with outside your church? What partners will you have for local, regional, and international missions? So those are some questions. By the way, I should have said those questions aren't original with me. They come from an article that Bishop Scott Jones, one of the two bishops, active bishops of the Global Methodist Church, wrote to help people that were asking him, we're thinking of going independent, what are the kinds of questions we ought to be asking? So here's the website of the Global Methodist Church. It's globalmethodist.org. I walked out of my office and forgot to grab business cards, so I don't have them to give you my email address, but I'm going to give it to you now. You can go to globalmethodist.org and go to leaders, and you'll find my picture and my email address. So that's one way you can get it. But if you want to write it down, it's fairly simple. It's my first initial, K, my last name, Boyette, B-O-Y-E-T-T-E, at globalmethodist.org. So K Boyette at globalmethodist.org. And Richard's right, I get almost 100 or more emails every day, and I try my best to respond to each and every one of them. So that's the end of my presentation. I now want you to ask questions, and there's a microphone set up over here, one in the center, and one over here. And I just invite you to come as you have a question. Ask your question. Remember, you're asked not to say your name or the church you're a part of, but just ask your question, and I or Richard will try to respond to them the best that we can. And don't be bashful. Come as you're led. Thank you for being the first one.
Okay, I have a question about deciding, like independent or global. What happens if a year from now we go, ooh, we don't want to be global? Or,
Yeah. So, okay, you become global, and then you say, you know what? I think we shouldn't have become global. We want to leave. Is that what you're asking? Yeah. So it's really easy. We ask you to take 90 days for prayer and discernment, and then you vote as a congregation in whatever form your leadership body decides. If you say you want a simple majority vote on that issue, that's what you can determine. And then you leave if you vote to leave. There's no sums of money that have to be paid. There are no other hoops to jump through. Nobody has to approve your decision. You don't have to worry about your property because you own it. We believe that you should be free to make that decision, and we only want churches to be part of the Global Methodist Church who are willingly part of the mission and ministry of the church.
Thank you, Keith. I had a quick question. If everything goes the way we hope it will, November 18th, at what point is there going to be an organizational meeting for churches, for an actual meeting of the North Georgia District, of the South Georgia Global Methodist Conference?
Yeah, I'm going to let Richard respond to that, and he can give you all that information.
Absolutely. Just to let you know that there has been an incredible amount of work already done to prepare for what the next steps are going to be in North Georgia. And just let me take a moment to let you know that there are active teams at this very moment. There are prayer teams that are active, evangelism teams that are active, mission teams, lay empowerment, finance, communications, IT, clergy relations, church relations, seminary relations, a legal team, and a board of ministry. All of those are already in place in North Georgia right now. As we get through November 18th and we are able to see, get a clearer picture of what clergy and what churches are going to be available, we will begin to, well, we've already begun to organize. We already have identified 11 districts in North Georgia, and some of you will have the opportunity to, when at the end of this meeting, to see the district maps and see where you would be located if you were to choose to be Global Methodist. Then there's already a plan in place for February the 10th. Bishop Jones from the Global Methodist Church, which is the bishop for Georgia and the South Georgia Provisional Conference, will be coming to a location in North Georgia to spend a day for celebration and information, and you will be invited to come and be a part of that gathering. And that will be one of several things that will be laid out for you in the next few months, as you will be able to see, as we are able to see, what the future is going to look like. Does that answer your question? All right, thank you.
And I would just say that, as we conceived how things would play out in Georgia, it was our expectation that there would actually be 2 provisional annual conferences here, one in South Georgia and one in North Georgia. But because of the events that unfolded that prevented churches from disaffiliating, it became clear that there were going to be fewer churches initially that would be here, and there would not be enough churches to sustain an annual conference right from the beginning, which is why North Georgia became a district of South Georgia. But now, with 300 or so churches potentially disaffiliating, there likely will be enough churches that will emerge that would make North Georgia sustainable. And at some point, the leadership of both the South Georgia Conference and the North Georgia District will discern that, and likely there'll be a separate provisional annual conference that will emerge. So, that's part of the being flexible in the midst of the messiness of this season. There was someone else who was getting up here to ask a question. No? Okay. I see several people coming. Please just come on, and whichever one of you gets there first, please.
Assuming the disaffiliations are approved on November 18th, our church is going to have a vote shortly thereafter regarding joining the Global Methodist Church. What is the date at which we become separated from the UMC, and when can members of our church affiliate with the new church, with the new GMC?
Sure. So when you apply for congregational membership, you will be asked to specify the date that you would like that membership to be effective. Most churches pick a date that will be about the time that they complete the disaffiliation process, which usually includes the payment of the money to the United Methodist Conference, and you're receiving deeds to your property. You pick a date. If you need to move that date, we move the date. But as soon as that process is completed, your membership in the Global Methodist Church is effective. There have been churches, including here in North Georgia, who have not yet disaffiliated but know they're in the process, who have gone ahead and applied even before the disaffiliation has been approved. And again, we approve those congregations to only be effective once their disaffiliation is finalized. But they then know that they've been approved and can move forward. And when both churches and clergy choose future effective dates, that information is kept completely confidential by our office, so that you don't have to worry that it gets out there that you are contemplating going to the Global Methodist Church, which some people are concerned would be a stumbling block for their disaffiliation. So the answer is when you determine effectiveness, and that is when you've completed the disaffiliation process. Yes, sir.
First, Keith, from everyone, thank you for your faith, your patience, your endurance, and stamina.
Thank you.
We appreciate the guidance you're bringing to all of us.
Thank you.
In the area of pastoral care and specifically appointment periods, what are your thoughts on the tenure of a pastor at a local church? Obviously, currently we are accustomed to seeing pastors change on a 4-year basis or thereabout.
Right, right. So it's stated in our transitional book of doctrines and discipline that we want to promote long-term pastorates. There's no specific number of years specified, but what we mean to communicate by that is that as long as the church believes that the clergy relationship is fruitful and effective for the church, and as long as the pastor believes that it's fruitful and effective, we want to support that continuation. But if the church or the pastor requests a change, then we would want to enter into a discernment process. I was the founding pastor of Wilderness Community Church in Spotsylvania, Virginia, and I was the pastor there for 19 years. Some people might say that was too long, okay? But as a result, I built long-term relationships with the leadership and the community, and we mutually believed that was very beneficial. The conference did try to remove me, but I said no, and the congregation said no, and for some reason, they acquiesced. But I see that as an example of what we would want to happen. Now, there'll be, obviously, a pastor can hear that there's another church that has come open and that's looking for a pastor, and they might want to throw their hat in that ring to be considered. And a congregation could hear that there's a pastor that's become available, and they might want to throw their hat in the ring for that, and that'll be possible. But I think the norm will be to encourage long-term pastorates so that stability can exist.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, let this gentleman here, and then I'll come to you, Larry.
What I'm hearing sounds too good to be true. You know, it's sort of like the old timeshare deal. You got into it, and now you want to get out, and they say, oh, well, too bad. So we don't want to jump out of the frying pan into the fire.
Absolutely.
After these 90 days trial that you just get us, then down the road we say, what do we do now? How do we disconnect?
Okay. So first, the 90-day period is not a 90-day trial period. It's when you decide, when there's people in your congregation that persuade the congregation we ought to reconsider, then we ask that you take a 90-day period to pray and discern as a congregation. But it is our commitment that that will never go away. We will never have a trust clause. We will never have any interest in your property that is legally enforceable. We do not have anything in the discipline about any financial payment to be made. Only the delegates to our general conference could ever address that differently. And given what we've all been through, none of us want that. So I cannot see that there will ever be a day that we will say, well, you have to jump through additional hoops to leave. And it makes no sense to me. I mean, to me, the vote on November 18th is a no-brainer. And the fact that there would be those who would say, we ought to vote against congregations that over 2/3 of the membership have said, we don't want to be part of your group anymore. The fact that you would even consider saying no to that, I don't know in what world that's rational. And we've seen churches that did not quite get the 2/3 vote. Well, entire blocks of those congregations have left. You cannot make people worship where they don't want to worship anymore, or be part of what they don't want to be. So I just believe that it's common sense that we would have a denomination that would, and so there's no fine print. A lawyer hasn't written this to say, we've got a trick up our sleeve. I would just say, hopefully you've come to know me, you've come to know others that are right now involved, and just know that we are firmly committed to letting anyone who ultimately concludes this is not for them, We want them to go with our blessing.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Keith, the Global Methodist Church calls what we call apportionments in the UMC. They call that connectional giving in the Global Methodist Church. Can you spend just a minute and give these people an idea of what those expectations are?
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, so it's not just a name change. You know, we didn't say, well, apportionments is a bad word, so we're going to come up with something different. It's an entirely different way of understanding how we participate together in funding ministries beyond our local church. So apportionments are derived by delegates at General Conference deciding on a budget for the church. And then they apportion that budget that they've decided on down to the conferences and down to your church. And then you're expected to pay what they have decided, okay? Connectional funding turns everything on its head. You will determine what your church is going to pay based upon a formula that is established. In simple terms, it says you will look at the operating income of your church, and you will take a percentage of that to share with the general church for general church ministries and with your annual conference for annual conference operations. Operating income is primarily your offerings, the tithes, the pledges, the offerings that are made and fulfilled in the course of a year. There can be some other minor things that go into operating income, but it excludes things like monies given to pay off notes and capital improvements and building maintenance projects and that sort of thing. Those are excluded. So you determine operating income, and then you apply a percentage. The general church, by the discipline, cannot have a percentage greater than 1.5%, 1.5%. The Transitional Leadership Council has said that during this season, the connectional funding for the general church is 1%. So if your operating income for the prior year was $100,000, you would pay $1,000 in general church connectional funding for over the next 12 months. The annual conference connectional funding cannot exceed 5%, okay? And the North Georgia area has set the percentage for supporting North Georgia activities at 1%. So in this season, it cannot exceed 2%. General church 1%, annual conference 1%. Most churches will find that that is a significant reduction from the amount that they were required to pay in apportionments. The percentage can only change as it is voted upon by the delegates to either the general conference or the annual conference. So until those bodies would change the percentage from 1% for general church and 1% for annual conference, that's the way it would be. If those bodies were to elect to change it, they cannot exceed the 1.5% for general church and the 5% for annual conference. The only way they could exceed those numbers is, again, if 3/4 of the delegates to those bodies voted to increase the ceiling. Again, I don't think it's likely that 3/4 of the delegates will ever vote to raise those percentages. And then the final thing I would say is the Transitional Leadership Council understands that many churches have faced significant costs in this season that have been incredibly disruptive to their financial operations. The amounts you've had to pay were more than you had contemplated. There may have been some loss in membership that have been part of this journey. And so the Transitional Leadership Council has liberally granted waivers from connectional funding relief. There's not been a single request that has not been approved. So what we're trying to do is model that we're in this together, that we want funds to remain at the local church level, that we only want the minimum amount necessary to do what is expected of the general church and the annual conference. So hopefully I've explained that, but if not, you've got a clarifying question, please ask. Yes, sir. And then I'll come to you.
I got a little confused while we were talking about conferences, the North Georgia Conference and the South Georgia Conference, and I thought I heard that the South Georgia Conference now has enough folks to take care of business, but we're a little short in the North Conference, and so we just gonna be a little district until a certain time comes along. I don't want to be second best. You understand what I'm saying? If we're going to be the I thought that we were in the North Georgia Conference. So I'm a little bit confused. And
Right.
maybe you can explain to me how we going to be on a level playing field.
Sure. So during this time when North Georgia churches were not able to get out of the United Methodist Church, there were so few churches in North Georgia that were able to organize, and they needed supervision, but they're not able to fund what they would need to fund to have an annual conference. So at the request of those North Georgia churches, and with the agreement of the South Georgia Conference, they were made a North Georgia district of the South Georgia Conference. Now, as you go past November the 18th, and more of the churches in North Georgia opt to be Global Methodist, and it becomes sustainable as a conference, then I fully expect the North Georgia district will request that they be recognized as a provisional annual conference, and that is the desire of the Transitional Leadership Council, to enable that to happen. So again, this is just like everything else we're involved in, it's a transitional period, and we're trying to respond to events on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, please.
We were affected. We had the plan began to work towards us becoming an annual conference, provisional annual conference, at the time that the pause was called for. So as a local church were put on hold on December 28th, which the date that will go down in infamy, on December the 28th, when you were put on pause, so was the planning towards the annual conference. As a matter of fact, at that point, we could not have continued to plan to move forward because no churches in North Georgia were allowed to leave. But we didn't want to sit around and not be prepared for whatever might come. And so the opportunity to partner with South Georgia gave us the opportunity to continue to plan and have an umbrella for us to work under until such time we had enough churches to move out on our own. I do believe sooner rather than later, North Georgia will be its own annual conference. That's what we're working for. That's what all of these teams are working for right now. But until November 18th and we get through that, and I also want to share that I think that there are going to be a significant number of churches that will want to be GMC immediately after November 18th, and then there will be a big wave initially, but then there will be a period of time where churches begin to trickle in. And so it makes sense for us to operate as we're operating right now as a district until enough of those churches come in that we don't have to rely on anybody else in order for us to move forward as an annual conference. But we're with you. We want to get to where we need to be, but God's good, and God's going to walk through us through this process, and we're not going to stand by and just do nothing while everything's going on.
Well, I understand what you're saying, I think. But everything I hear we're talking about North Georgia Conference. All all the literature, all the information, everything is going to have North Georgia Conference, and we're really not going to be at the North Georgia Conference. Is that kind of what we're saying? I'm simple-minded, and I don't understand
think so.
it.
I think right now we're known as the North Georgia District of the South Georgia Provisional Conference, but we are working as quickly as we possibly can to be the North Georgia Provisional Annual Conference.
So the Transitional Leadership Council set as a guideline that generally speaking, in order for an area to be a provisional annual conference, it needed to have 125 churches. Why? Because they have to be able to fund the necessary operations of an annual conference, and we believed it would take 125 churches not to have to be paying 5%, to pay less as a percentage. North Georgia has not had even 20 churches yet, but they will have 125 once the November 18th event occurs, if it passes.
At present, we have 13 churches.
13, there you go.
And 6 of those 13 churches are churches that we began, our church plants, that happened because a church decided they were not going to have a vote, or unfortunately a few of those churches who did not get the 2/3 vote, and people left, and we began a new church for them.
Thank you.
Yeah, just, I'm real simple. Is there any disadvantage for us not to be in this conference? Understand what I'm saying? I thought that's where we were. Everybody was the same thing. But evidently something different about us being under the South Georgia Conference. Is that not right?
We've tried to explain why that is.
Well, maybe that's just, I don't get it, but it's by name only, and we say we're going to have this pretty quick, but
Well,
I don't know. Maybe.
Things don't descend from heaven for us. They don't. We have to have things occur, and in order to be able to move forward, we've responded to the events on the ground, and we are prepared to pivot, to be nimble, to organize North Georgia when it has the number of churches, which ought to be after November 18th. And I hear your firm desire for that to occur. I believe it will occur, but things have to develop that way. Thank you.
All right.
Yes, let me come over here.
Hi. I just want to say, Keith, I heard you about a year ago in Grovetown, and you were a dynamo then, and you're still a dynamo.
Thank you.
My question is regard to pastors. I know that, we have the November deadline. There's some churches that are saying, and this is on social media, that their pastor is walking away at that vote and not going to continue supporting the church through December 31st. Most of, within the Methodist guidelines, they've taken, a contract till December 31st. But anyway, my thing is that I belong to a small Methodist country church. Are you going to have requirements on membership? Are you going to only take a church that has 25, 30 attending members? Are you going to, as long as we want to join, will you accept us?
Absolutely.
Are you going to look into perhaps the creation of charges
We
where
will
we
invite,
share pastors?
we will invite churches that are unable to afford a full-time pastor to mutually agree to come together to support a shared pastor. We are not going to impose that on churches. That's contrary to our philosophy. But we will attempt to facilitate that and help churches reach those agreements.
And perhaps with the new independence that we have, perhaps we are going to be more open to accept other people in our community that have been, let go from other churches or whatever. My next question is, there may be a period of time because you don't know how many pastors are going to be free as of December 31st to start filling those positions. Is that correct?
Well, what I would say is, if your church, and this is to anyone, if your church knows that it desires to become Global Methodist or anticipates that it's going to have a desire to go Global Methodist, and also anticipates that its current pastor is going to not go forward with it, I would urge you to communicate that to Richard so that I know he's already praying through and talking to people to try to make those connections. The sooner he knows that, the sooner his team knows that, the sooner they can work on those issues. There will be some transition period, though, and you don't know until you're there. He doesn't know until after November 18th what churches might be in that pool or what pastors are going to be available. Richard, you may want to respond to share about how that process is going forward now and some of the inquiries you're getting about possibilities of pastoring.
My next question kind of goes with this. Is it true that the North Georgia Conference, has a stranglehold on retired Methodist ministers who wish to preach at global Methodist churches?
Yes, sadly it is true. If the way that it is set up right now, if a retired United Methodist pastor preaches at either a disaffiliated independent church or a global Methodist church, they are subject to have the potential of being brought up on charges and their license removed. That is one of the sad realities that we are dealing with right now, and the one that just absolutely never makes sense. I'm retired as a United Methodist pastor. I retired in good standing as a United Methodist pastor. I am now a Global Methodist elder, but I cannot go to a United Methodist church and perform an act of ministry. So, that is true. There are a number of clergy that are already applying to the GMC that are presently UMC. And they're just waiting for the day, just like you're waiting for the day, for them to be able to withdraw from the conference and be able to move forward. I receive multiple times during the week, I receive inquiries from clergy that are in the North Georgia Conference about what potential moves they may have or opportunities they may have. And I, on several days a week, several occasions, almost every week, I will receive inquiries from other annual conferences around the Southeast and around the country asking what is available in North Georgia. So, but the bottom line, and the only way that I can truly be honest about what is going on right now, is I don't know till I know. But I'm already working with churches, some of those that are already out. I'm already beginning to send clergy that are able to go there to have conversations. They're already having those conversations right now, and I'm sure that we'll be seeing a few pulpits being filled sooner rather than later. Did that answer your question? Well, it is very sad. That's about all I'm going to say about that.
We have had pastors that could not even go to a graveyard.
Right.
And preach a funeral.
No, I understand what you're saying, and there will be people that will be accountable for the Lord Jesus Christ for the actions they're taking. A couple others have questions here, and we'll keep them coming, but I would just say this. You have been treated horrendously by the powers that be. You rightly feel injured, hurt, wounded, and are filled with fear and anxiety about what might happen in the coming days. I urge you to follow Jesus' admonition, to love those who seek to cause you harm, to bless them instead of cursing them. You will show them the true character of Christ. I sat for 9 months negotiating against 14 other people what became the protocol. And they, in a moment, reneged on every agreement they made. You don't think I was a little bit upset and angry about what happened? But I pray for those 14 people on the other side every day. If I have the opportunity to speak to them, I don't say anything negative to them because they've made their bed to lay in. And I hope that by the witness we give, we show them that there is a better way to follow Christ. Pray, work to be the disciples of Jesus. Know that he's blessing you in the midst of what none of you would have asked for. I was at LaGrange yesterday, and the people of Wesley Church say, well, they didn't want to lose the vote, but it's the best thing that ever happened to them. So we can sometimes be surprised by the way God does not answer our prayers the way we want them. So I would just urge you there. I don't know which of you were at the microphone first, okay? She's saying you.
This is just a little bit of a follow-up about the pastoral transition. It sounds to me like that the process is similar to what we're used to in terms of SPR and the local church making a decision and the collaboration. So it's twofold. One is obviously moving down the road, someone would, after the prayer and collaboration, will be making a final decision on the placement. And I hear that intent from both of you can weigh in, is how much the local church will be involved in that communication, as well as the conference or a committee or a team. And then the other that would solve that, as I know, is if you can expand a little bit more on the training and the availability that may be there. And I know we don't always know that about a pool of pastors, which would have to be on down the road. So that's
sure. So I'm aware of a couple situations across the United States where a church has been presented with 3, 4, 5 potential people to be their pastor. And they have come back each time and said, nope, nope, nope. And at some point, the presiding elder, President Pro Tem, have said, well, we've sent you everybody we can think of, and you've said no to all of them. We can't create somebody that doesn't exist for you. Now we need to talk about, given that you've rejected the people we've given, will you work with us that we might assign you one? The ultimate appointive authority rests with the bishop. The pastor is sent, but I have watched conference officials go to great lengths to try to work with a local church, something that never happened in the United Methodist Church. Go to great lengths to try to hear and reach agreement on for the sake of the mission of the church. And I've been, frankly, stunned, I guess, at the length that people are committed to doing that. And I support that and celebrate that. Now the training question, are you talking about training pastors generally?
Just elaborate a little bit more on what you could tell us maybe about, you mentioned seminaries, training, and maybe a process of vetting, which would be with the minister. and both of you could chime in on that.
Right,
If you
right.
could tell us
So,
a little more.
so paragraph 407 of the Book of Discipline, and by the way, you can access this on our website. It's all there. You can search it and find provisions. If you want, you can download a PDF and have it on your computer. If you choose to, you can print it off. It's 100 pages. The UM Book of Discipline is 1,000 pages. So it's significantly different. So you can read all of this. Paragraph 407 says that the educational requirements can be met through either an alternative educational pathway, which is like a course of study, and we have approved several, I think it's 5 now, alternative educational pathways, which permit people to begin that process of meeting the educational requirements without having to have completed a bachelor's degree. Okay, so they can meet the requirements without having a bachelor's degree, and to do so remotely if that's what they have to do. So it's very accessible. The 7 or the 8 institutions that have been approved or been recommended to perhaps give Masters of Divinity or Masters of Arts in Christian Leadership or those sorts of degrees, biblical studies, they are, I'll name them, Asbury Theological Seminary, United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio, Ashland Theological Seminary in Ashland, Ohio, the Beeson Divinity School at Baylor, at Samford University, Wesley Biblical Seminary in Mississippi, the Truett Seminary at Baylor University, and we just approved the Wesley Seminary at Indiana Wesleyan University. I guess that's 7. And so they, again, have multiple avenues in which you can pursue a Master's of Divinity or another master's degree.
Thank you. Thank you both for your work.
Absolutely. And now, yes, ma'am. Thank you for your patience.
My question may be, you may have already answered this, and I just need clarification, and this is about the pastors. The current ministers in the United Methodist Church, if they choose to leave the United Methodist Church, in order to keep their credentials, they would have to join forces with another group. Is that what you're saying, with like Global or someone?
Right. Well, the United Methodist Church says that if you serve a church which is United Methodist, you have to surrender your credentials. So it's not possible for a United Methodist clergy person to serve a non-United Methodist church. Now, those who choose to become Global Methodist clergy persons their ordination is recognized. And so an elder in the United Methodist Church is received as an elder in the Global Methodist Church and is given orders. A deacon receives a deacon. Now, licensed local pastors, their educational standing is evaluated, and many of them have been approved to be ordained deacons or to be ordained elders. And for example, on Saturday, 140 persons were ordained elder in the North Carolina Provisional Annual Conference. Many of them had previously been licensed local pastors, but they met the educational requirements and character requirements of the Global Methodist Church. Okay. If a United Methodist Church pastor leaves the United Methodist Church to pastor an independent church, they either do not have an ordination, or some of them have chosen to seek ordination in the Global Methodist Church. We permit them to serve an independent Methodist church, but they are deemed to be inactive as Global Methodist pastors, which means that they cannot vote at our annual conferences and they can't participate in our benefit programs. But they are credentialed by us and they are subject to the Book of Doctrines and Discipline.
Okay, so that leads to the next question. Their pensions.
Their pensions.
Yes, are when they leave the United Methodist Church, if they choose to leave the United Methodist Church and they decide to go global, do their pensions follow them, or do they have a dual pension?
Well,
In other words, do
right, I
they
understand.
lose? I'm worried about that.
Yeah. First, they cannot lose their pensions. They are legally vested,
Okay.
and the money is held in fiduciary accounts that Westpath has to keep and has to pay out the way they've committed to pay it out under the contracts. What happens is that your pension funds from the United Methodist program are all transferred into what is known as the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan, PIP account. And they stay there unless you as the beneficiary direct that they be moved to some other legally approved investment account. Now, we have entered into an agreement with Westpath for the Covenant Retirement Plan, and so a pastor in the Global Methodist Church who serves a Global Methodist congregation would begin to have pension contributions into that Covenant Retirement Plan, which is in a PIP account as well with Westpath.
And that's immediate?
Immediate.
Okay, so there's no 1 year?
No,
Okay.
the 1 year.
Okay.
Now, health benefits are a little bit different. The United Methodist Church will terminate your health benefits as of the day you withdraw. They then have to notify Westpath that you have left the United Methodist Church. Westpath has to do something to end the health insurance and then to make it available for us to enroll you in health insurance. But we backdate your enrollment to the date that you are effective, the date you withdraw, and Westpath has agreed to that. So there should be no lapse in your health insurance coverage.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure. Yes, here comes a gentleman from the back, and then we'll get your comment. We'll see if there's any other questions after this, and then I'll be available for individual. Yes, sir.
Yeah, this may be a cart before the horse question. I was kind of astonished looking at the North Georgia website on how small many of the churches are. I thought our congregation was probably in the bottom 25%. I found out we're probably in the top 25%. But I do know that the Augusta District was looking at consolidation of many of the downtown churches, which we're one of. From a business perspective, that makes a lot of sense. Has the Global Methodist Church thought about that, how they would orchestrate that, facilitate that?
Well, first I would say that a merger of congregations never works when it comes from on high. Okay? Certainly I can see the possibility where congregations have that interest, where we would seek to facilitate that if that was the desire of the congregations. But I also want to say, and particularly to the lady who asked the question about small membership churches, I pastored a church. My first church was a church that averaged 50 people, and by the way, that is probably the average Methodist church. Okay, you're right. If you were running 100 and above, you're in the top 10, 20% of the denomination. Okay. But that congregation averaged 50 when I got there, and 4 years later, when I left, they were averaging 200. Now, that wasn't because I'm such a great pastor. The Holy Spirit moved in that congregation. And I believe that potentially exists in every small membership church. And I believe we are called as a movement to support small membership churches. They are the bread and butter of the Methodist movement. And I believe God desires to bring revival and renewal. But you're right, there's a place where the ministry of that church has run its course. And if a church discerns that that's where it's at and it wants to explore options, we want to help facilitate that. But we will never compel that kind of thing to happen.
Good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So you had a comment.
Well, I was going to comment. My understanding from Westpath regarding the health coverage was that if there were any hiccup in the transition from UMC to GMC, that they would and did offer COBRA plans
It depends on the contract of the annual conference. I believe North Georgia has what's known as a continuation of benefits provision. And, some pastors, some churches would purchase that. But we have not had a single pastor who was serving a GM church and the church desired to provide them with health insurance that have had a lapse of coverage. We have had people not get their cards until 3 or 4 weeks after they have come, but our agreement with WestPath is they will cover all claims from the date that we enroll the person in the GMC health plan. Are there other questions? You've been very patient and attentive. I'm going to say there are no more questions that you want to ask publicly. I will be around for as long as needed. Richard, I'm sure, will be here for a little while. We'll be glad to have individual conversations, and I'm going to invite Richard to come and close us.
Let's give Keith a hand. Once again, thank you so much, Keith, for your willingness to be with us and share. A couple of things that I need to share with you before I do a benediction is after this session, if each church represented here will send one person to this room right behind us back here. The fellow mentioned the timeshare a while ago. We kind of sound like a timeshare. We have a gift for you. What we are asking for is each person, one person from each church to go back to make sure that we have your church and a contact person listed from your church. And if you will go do that, then we have a packet from Seedbed that at least one for each church, so that you can sit back, that you can go back to your church and find out some of the information and resources that are available to you. And the reason that we're asking those questions, I've been asked that, why are you asking for contact information and this, that, and the other? We have this thing called November 18th coming up. And we want to make sure that we get as much information into your hands as possible and make sure that any questions that you might have about the called annual conference, that we can answer those questions. And we especially want to make sure that your delegates, both clergy and lay, are there to vote. That is absolutely essential that you were there on that day to vote. We also want to remind you not only of the 18th Special Annual Conference meeting, but also the pre-conference webinar to be held on October 29th at 3 o'clock. Everybody here is eligible to register for that webinar. So you get on there so that you can represent your church to hear what is going on, and hopefully in this webinar we will hear how the vote is going to take place at the annual conference. I hope that we will be able to hear that, because the rumor mill, as you probably know, is gone crazy, and it would be nice to be able to have that. And it's also important for you to know that your lay members of the conference, the ones that are your delegates that are going, they have to pre-register before the November 18th date, and they have to be at the Classic Center by 9 o'clock to register there at the Classic Center to make sure that you have your badge and your voting machines in order to vote. So we just want to remind you of that. It's also, we want to remind you that it is absolutely imperative that your delegate and your clergy delegate stay as long as the conference lasts. Please do not, once your church is listed and we pray that your church is able to get out to say hallelujah and you hit the exits, just think about everybody else that's supposed to come up for a vote after that point. So we need for you to stay the entire time so that everybody gets the benefit of your yes vote, okay? I believe that that's my announcements, and so I'm going to leave you with this. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. May the Lord be gracious unto you, and may the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen and amen.